Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK.
Here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Good evening. With every day that goes by, the sub-postmaster scandal gets worse. Now we learn that money was being taken back from them virtually by extortion. A man who led one of the biggest employment agencies in Britain has written a piece today saying immigration is destroying the economy, contrary to all the narrative that you always get. And I'll be joined on Talking Pints by Danny Gator, a man who turned disaster into triumph. And Danny Crates won a gold medal in the Paralympics. I wonder, how do you cope when you've had an accident and lost an arm? How do you get back and then go on and become a champion? Well, Danny did. But before all of that, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, the top story from the GB Newsroom tonight is that the official inquiry into the Post Office scandal has been grilling a former investigator about what he did and didn't know regarding the faulty Horizon IT software at the centre of the debacle. Stephen Bradshaw insisted today he wasn't an expert on the system, and he defended comments he made back in 2012 that he had absolute confidence in Horizon, while at the same time admitting he did see hundreds of complaints coming in from sub-postmasters. He denied allegations of bullying and unprofessional behaviour at the time, saying he also never told any post office worker that they were the only one experiencing issues with the software.
I'm not technically minded with that. I would expect that to come from the people above. If there was an issue, I would expect Fujitsu to inform the post office and the full post office to let us know what the issues are. I was given that statement by Cartwright King and told to put that statement through. In hindsight, after I've put further in my previous statements, there probably should have been another line stating that these are not my words, but the statement is produced as a business statement.
Stephen Bradshaw speaking today at the Post Office inquiry. Well, in the United States, protesters have been calling for Donald Trump to be jailed as closing arguments are heard in his New York civil fraud trial. If you're watching on TV, a few flashing images coming up. Outside the courthouse, people held up signs showing the former president behind bars, the state seeking nearly $350 million in penalties after the Trump Organization was found to have inflated its net worth to banks. The judge previously ruled that Mr. Trump shouldn't be allowed to make his own statement in court after he refused to agree to limits on what he would be and what he wouldn't be allowed to say. But speaking outside the courtroom, Mr. Trump accused the White House of election interference.
Because it is an unconstitutional witch hunt. It's election interference at the highest level. It's a disgrace. It's in coordination with the White House and Joe Biden because he can't win a campaign fairly. And we're going through it, but it is indeed a terrible witch hunt. We're going to have a news conference a little bit later on. As you know, I want to speak. I want to make the summation. At this moment, the judge is not letting me make the summation because I'll bring up things that he doesn't want to hear. And it's a very unfair trial. Nobody's seen anything like this.
And that news conference Donald Trump was referring to there, we'll try and bring you the details of that later on this evening here on GB News. Now, in news here at home, the NHS is failing to hit most of its key performance targets, despite the overall waiting list dropping, according to new data. More than 355,000 people in England have been waiting over a year to begin hospital treatment. That was in November last year, although that is down from more than 377,000 at the end of October. But more than 11,000 people in England have been waiting over 18 months to start treatment. Today, the government announced plans for a new major nuclear power station planned to be as big as both Hinkley Point and Sizewell. It's in a bid to strengthen the UK's energy security and ultimately lower electricity bills. £300 million will also be invested, the government says, in producing fuel to power the reactors, removing dependence on Russian supplies. The Prime Minister's confirmed he won't be attending the World Economic Forum in Davos next week, sending senior ministers instead. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, the French President Emmanuel Macron, and the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen will all be there. But the government says its priorities will be championing British growth sectors and promoting business investment. The 54th World Economic Forum begins in the Swiss ski resort next Tuesday against what's likely to be the most complicated global political backdrop in its history. And lastly, a disruptive Arctic snow blast is set to hit Britain next week. The Met Office warning of a northerly airflow delivering extreme cold and snow showers from Sunday. That means travel plans could once again be affected. And the RAC motoring organisation has been warning drivers to prepare emergency survival kits in case of a breakdown in their car. Meanwhile, the government's cold health alert remains in place, warning of the severe weather's potential to have a significant impact on vulnerable people. That's the news on GB News across the UK on TV and on your digital radio as well as your smart speaker. This is Britain's News Channel.
Good evening. You know, every day that goes by with this Horizon scandal and what happened to sub-postmasters and mistresses up and down this country, every day that goes by, this just gets worse. Because what we've learned overnight is an horrendous culture that existed within the post office where inside investigation teams were on bonuses for the money they could reclaim from the sub-postmasters. And the way it operated with this chap Gary Thomas in charge, who some say acted like a mafia gangster, that we finished up with thousands, I don't know how many, perhaps 2,500 to 3,000 of these folk out there, paying back money to the post office that they never owed the post office in the first place. The investigatory team's getting their bonuses, but people doing it to avoid criminal prosecution. As I say, with each day that goes past, it gets worse. And frankly, it almost looks like some form of extortion racket to me. It is a disgrace. But it has been a good week. It's been a good week. This story really has caught the public mood in the most extraordinary way. It's the little guy against the giant global corporates. That's how it looks. That's how it feels. And the government has moved. Well, I'm very pleased to say that this evening, I'm joined by Patrick Green, KC, barrister at Henderson Chambers, who secured victory for 550 sub-postmasters in the Post Office Group litigation. And this was achieved back in 2019,
yeah.
Patrick, I think.
That's right.
An epic battle.
It was a massive battle, yeah. It was unbelievable. Huge. We felt that we were completely outgunned because the Post Office effectively had an unlimited budget, and we really didn't.
Yeah, but you got there. You won.
Yeah, it was fantastic victories in all the judgments, and then we had to make the best settlement that we could because we'd repeatedly run out of money, although Post Office didn't know that.
Yeah.
And we'd had to get litigation funding because we had to make sure that there was no risk to the postmasters if we lost.
Yep.
And that they would all be litigating completely for free.
So vindication for 550 souls and their immediate families and friends, and of course they're standing in their own communities and all of those things. But as you say, financially, you know, the compensation, once it was divided up amongst 550 people, was peanuts. So with what the government have said in the last 72 hours, these people are now going to get fair compensation.
Yeah, that seems to be the plan. I mean, what they've announced is a £75,000 upfront payment for each of the 555 of my clients. And I think what's implied is they will then look at those cases in which further compensation is due.
Up to a package of 600,000, depending on circumstances.
We will see the detail. I just want to see the actual detail. I'm sorry to be careful about it, but
after all these years, I think you've got every right to be. Because it does seem to me that it's all well and good, the Minister getting up in the House of Commons and saying these things, but many of those people that you defended are becoming quite elderly, aren't they?
Yeah, and there's quite a large number of them who've died already without seeing real justice. And in a way, it's very sad that they didn't get to see the ITV docudrama and the public's reaction to it, which speaks not only to their decency, the decency of my clients, which is totally apparent to us as a council team when we're doing the case, but also, I think, touches on the sort of British sense as a nation of fairness and decency, which I think has underpinned the national outcry that is a reaction to this TV series.
Absolutely. The great British public are very, very fair-minded people, and that there is no question whatsoever. But, of course, I mentioned at the top there, we don't quite know the number, but it looks like 2,500 to 3,000 sub-postmasters paid money back that in the vast majority of cases they didn't need to pay back, but they were too scared of being taken to court.
Oh, well, I mean, they were massively intimidated, and indeed in the litigation, one of the things we pleaded was that they were put under economic duress. So that's absolutely right. But just in terms of numbers, Nigel, and I think it could be more.
Really?
Yeah, because I think from memory, we had 555 claimants, and of those, I think only 69 had been convicted.
Right.
Right. So if you do the maths,
gosh, it could be an enormous number.
It could be about 10 times 500. So
I'm going to say
something 4 to 5,000. Not impossible. Some of those may have smaller losses.
Yeah.
But being forced to cash in your ISA.
Yeah.
And stuff that money into the till when you've done nothing wrong.
But I kind of get it. I mean, if they're saying, give us 20 grand or we'll take you to court, you probably think, I can't face the public humiliation of this.
It's worse than that, actually, because what a normal company would have had to do is say, right, Nigel, I'm going to sue you in the county court or the high court. It'll be a civil case. You'll either win or you lose. If you lose, you just have to pay the money and some costs. But you're not terrified.
No.
Yeah? They didn't do that. They used their prosecutorial powers to say, Nigel, I'm prosecuting for theft. You're like, what? I've never stolen anything. Yeah. And then you're absolutely terrified you're going to go to jail, because if you steal from your employer, which is analogous to this, you go to jail. Yeah. And then on the door of the court, they would say, well, actually, if you admit false accounting, you won't go to jail. So these people were like completely terrified.
Rather like the American prosecutor. There's a system where you almost have to plead guilty to something.
It was, it's heartbreaking when you talk to the actual people who were forced into that position.
You knew some of the intimidatory tactics that were being used.
Yes.
Were you aware of this bonus culture that existed? No. I mean, this is a very new story that's broken overnight.
Yeah. And there's quite a lot of information that one would have thought would be disclosable in the group litigation, which we didn't see at the time, which we've been watching come out since.
It gets worse by the day.
Yeah.
What would you, final thought, Patrick, and thank you for coming in. What would you like to see happen next?
I would like to see I actually do agree with this proposed legislation to cancel all the convictions. I know it's controversial, but the thing people are missing on that is that the Parliament would not be going against the courts, and I'm sure that's been cleared with Lord Chief Justice. Parliament's actually going with the grain of what all the judges and courts are now saying. So I don't see the real constitutional sensitivity. So early legislation to cancel the convictions, number one, and swift payment, not only to my clients, but also in the scheme that we agreed the Post Office would set up for everyone else.
That's going to be the sticky bit, in my opinion, but I hope you're right, Patrick. Thank you for coming in.
It's a great pleasure.
And great work.
Thank you
great
very
work.
much
Well
indeed.
done.
Thank you.
In a moment, we'll have a look at the British economy. We're always told that open-door immigration is really good for our GDP and really good for our economy. Well, today, somebody who was one of the biggest employment agency owners in the country says actually it's proving to be a little bit of a disaster. Back with you in a couple of minutes.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel. Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Let's discuss immigration, whether it's been a good thing or a bad thing for the UK, and what's happening post-Brexit to our balance of trade with Europe and the rest of the world. To begin with immigration. Now, a man called Philip Ullman wrote a piece in the business pages of The Telegraph this morning. He describes himself as a former chief executive of one of the country's largest employment agencies. I had over 100,000 people working for me every year, the majority of which came from EU expansion countries. And he says there is this narrative that we have to have a continual stream of people coming into our country. It's good for GDP. We have an ageing population. We couldn't possibly cope. The Brits are all too thick and lazy and fat and useless to work. And that's the justification that we get. And that it's really good for the economy. And you will hear that everywhere. But Philip Ullman says the results are clear. Immigration has been dangerously harming our economy. And the point he's making are that GDP per capita has not gone up. Of course, GDP goes up. The economy is bigger because there are more people in it. But our productivity has fallen so much, we're now considerably below that of France. And he makes the point that actually there's been a race to the bottom over these last 20 years. And that the idea that now a family of four could be supported on one income is frankly for the birds for millions and millions of people. I'd hope with Brexit that we would genuinely start to change this culture around. We get manifesto commitments to do it, but it never, ever happens. Now, I'm joined by Stephen Hunsaker, researcher at UK in a Changing Europe. And Stephen, whether it's immigration, whether it's trade, we're dealing with a post-Brexit Britain. And I mentioned already that I'd hope numbers would come down and we'd upskill, and it hasn't happened yet. I'd also hope that with trade, that we would start to do more trade around the rest of the world. Your figures out today suggest we're not really doing that.
That's correct. It's actually quite interesting to see is that as a total share of UK trade, the EU makes up now more than it did all the way going back till 2008, actually. And so that's quite a surprising number. And when we look at that, that sounds on the surface like that's saying that trade with the EU has been going up. When in reality, actually, it's that trade with non-EU countries has been going down recently. And so what that is this is something that both sides were kind of wrong about. We had a lot of economists that were saying that there was going to be a cliff edge, that Brexit was going to cause trade with the EU to, just fall off and was going to damage the UK economy. And the other side was saying that, well, Brexit is going to allow us to boost trade with our non-UK partners and see new growth and expansion. And pretty much what these results show is that neither side were right. We're seeing stability, if not stagnation, with the EU, but then we're not seeing that growth happen with non-EU countries.
No. Despite the fact we've signed a whole series of new trade deals, we inherited some from the European Union, but signed some of our own. No, it's funny this, isn't it? I mean, on the one hand, it's good news, as you say, because our trade with Europe's not really been damaged at all. I mean, people want our goods and we want theirs and we go on doing business. But it is bad news because I've always taken the view that, yes, the European market's next door, and that's helpful in many ways. But in terms of global GDP, in terms of the global pie, it's about 15% of the world. It'll be 10% of the world in 5 years' time. And it's the new markets where the growth is. So what is it? What do you think we're getting wrong here?
I think that, for one, that the government has really focused on these trade deals being PR successes. Quickly get them out, make sure that they look like really good deals. But the problem is that they're not looking hard enough at the substance at many of these. These trade deals, for one, are maybe being overpromised that they're going to have immediate impacts or are going to immediately benefit. These take time. Imagine if there's a UK business that is trading a lot with Germany, but all of a sudden here's that Australia opens up. They're going to start maybe looking into building those trade relations with them, but that takes time to build that, to find a clientele and everything. And so they're not going to see immediate results. And to promise that, I think, is misleading the public.
Well, that's called politics, yes.
Yeah,
But isn't the truth of it also, whether you have a trade deal or not, there are many profitable trading relationships, even where there's tariff involved.
It's true.
If you've got a product that somebody wants to buy at a price they think's acceptable, they will buy it anyway. Clearly, we're not making the right products.
Well, I think we need to look at where our strengths are. The thing is that the UK of the 80s is not the UK now as far as what was the big things. If we look at the research that we've done at UK and Changing Europe, services are one of the biggest strengths. The numbers are actually looking really good with the UK with services. It's been very resilient and has been really going up and has been kind of keeping our trade up. And so I think what it needs to look at is that we need to look
services
at...
being insurance, products like that?
Financial, yes, exactly. It's not as much the construction of that product as it is the selling of the services, the softwares, the consulting, those other governments. We have a lot of expertise. We have a lot of knowledge.
We're good at legal services.
Exactly.
We provide a lot of medical services. Now, there are many things we're good at, but what about manufacturing? Because we keep hearing the story that British manufacturing is doing rather better than we think.
That is a difficult one, and I think that's one that there's a lot of factors that are going into it that makes it hard to say. Where one is that within manufacturing, we need to look to the future, and where that is that regardless of what party it is, a lot is going towards green manufacturing, whether it's for our country or for another country. And so looking at how we can be competitive within this new sector, somewhat new sector, but, you know, this very booming sector is where is a place that the UK can set itself out and differentiate instead of trying to just simply copy what other countries. The UK can't compete with the US or its new subsidies on many of those things. It needs to find areas where it has strengths or where it could very easily have strengths and use what
I suppose I could counter that by saying what we could do is produce a lot more oil and gas and export it, which would run counter to that narrative. It would. But trade is still trade. Stephen, thank you for coming in. It's, as I say, it's a good news story and it's a bad news story. It is. The good news story, folks, is there was no cliff edge. Brexit has not led to a catastrophic fall in business with the European Union. It, frankly, was never going to. The disappointment is we're not taking more advantage of our potential on the world stage. But a lot of that isn't about politics. A lot of that is about the products we are manufacturing that are not being bought in the numbers that our economy needs. Now, we've heard again today that for the first time in 70 years, there's going to be a big expansion of our nuclear power industry. Something, of course, that is beginning to become a strong majority view, particularly those worried about CO2 and climate change, the only way we can produce baseload energy with zero carbon emissions. But is this really a big change? Or did we hear it all before with Boris Johnson? And to date, not much happened. All of that in just a moment. Plus, Sadiq Khan giving a big speech at Mansion House. I'll tell you what's in it.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Where on earth is all this electricity going to come from our EVs and everything else? And it's all well and good to build wind turbines, but sometimes the wind doesn't blow. I've always been an advocate for nuclear power. There is no other way to get baseload, reliable, consistent energy without huge carbon dioxide emissions. And it seems there is a change going on right across the Western world. Opinion polls from America to Europe show there are now quite firm majorities saying we have to expand our nuclear industries. But it's something we've been talking about for years, and whilst things are happening down at Hinkley Point, albeit with Chinese money, down in the West Country, it was Boris Johnson that said we're going to build 8 new nuclear power stations, and now today the government tell us they're going to build 3. Yet it's still sold as the biggest increase in nuclear power in Britain for 70 years. What does it all mean? Well, Malcolm Grimston comes on this show and informs us as former information officer at the Nuclear Industry Association and now research fellow at Imperial College. Malcolm, do you understand my slight cynicism about this? Because I hear on the news this morning, biggest increase in 70 years, but it's not even as big as Boris promised.
No, I mean, the interesting thing is if you look at the uranium price, it has been going through the roof recently globally, which is an indication, as you say, that there's a real reassessment of nuclear globally, and Britain would be crazy to be left out of that. We were the crucible of new nuclear power in the 1960s. So that's the good news. But even going back to the early Thatcher years, there was a sense of 10 new nuclear stations. We ended up just with Sizewell B from that. And it's about the practicalities. These are very good words, and good words are brilliant.
Yes.
But next we have to get a proper funding mechanism and a way of dealing with the over-regulation. If they can be cracked, then it could be full steam ahead.
We funded Hinkley Point, but it's the Chinese state funding it, which gives people huge concerns about national security, etc.
Yes, I mean, there was some Chinese investment in Hinkley C. It was mainly the French. But that particular scheme, it's a matter that nuclear stations being so expensive to build, the risk, the economic risk, is right at the front of the project. If it overruns on time and cost, then the overall effect is there. And understandably, private firms, which tend to have rather short-term horizons, are nervous about that. With a gas-fired station, most of the price is the gas. If the gas shoots up, then somebody's just going to pay for it.
Now, we keep hearing these stories about the Rolls-Royce small modular nuclear power stations. Are any of those up and running around the world yet?
The Chinese now have one running.
Do they?
They're ahead in the technology, but the States, the Canadians, Europeans, and over here with looking at the Rolls-Royce, it is certainly catching on. It's not an ideal solution here. There will still be a place for big nuclear stations within grids, producing baseload, as you talk about.
Yeah.
But this extra thing, and actually the submarine reactors that we were building in the 50s are small modular reactors.
I know exactly what they are, and without them, our submarine fleet wouldn't be able to exist. Last thought. Heard some stories this week about uranium enrichment that's going to start to happen in this country because there isn't much access to these products unless it comes from Russia or somewhere like that. Have we made a decision to get back to the 50s and 60s and to be in the vanguard of all of this?
Well, I hope so. We had that Urenco, Capenhurst in Cheshire, been enriching uranium for many, many years. But there is an issue that a lot of the nuclear fuel in Europe is coming from Russia, and the geopolitics being as it is, and just general security of supply. I think that's £300 million have been announced to go into fuel fabrication, because, of course, being the first into the thing, we were the first into all of these technologies. We've now fallen a bit behind as other people have taken it up.
We were rather good at it.
We were extremely good.
And I'd like us to be good at it again. Malcolm, thank you for coming in and bringing us up to speed on what is a very important subject. Now, we have some rather important breaking news now on an escalating situation in Yemen. Joining us on the phone is our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, to give us a brief.
We've just had it confirmed that the Cabinet is meeting on an urgent short notice call this evening, and that is linked to the ongoing crisis involving missiles and drones being fired from Yemen. The Commons Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, is also being called to a Cabinet meeting in Whitehall, or at least a Cabinet office briefing in Whitehall this evening. We don't get these short notice Cabinet call-arounds unless it is an issue of national importance. This has been telegraphed, of course, by the Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, and his counterparts in the US over a number of days because of what is clearly an escalation out of Yemen. We had the biggest single attack involving 21 drones and missiles that were fired from Yemen on Tuesday night, and HMS Diamond, the Type 45 British air defence destroyer, was engaged in that action. It had to shoot 7 of those drones down that were heading in the direction of that Royal Naval vessel. The US, of course, as well, with its aircraft carrier, the US Dwight D. Eisenhower and supporting ships, is out there, took part in the Tuesday night action. That was, though, a defensive action that took place to defend shipping and, of course, defend those naval vessels out there from attack. What we understand now is that we are moving to the next phase, the phase of some kind of military action, strikes against those Houthi rebels in Yemen, and that there will be some kind of British involvement in that.
Mark White, thank you for bringing us up to speed. And yes, the Cabinet will meet in about 10 minutes' time. Funny, I've been saying a couple of times over the last week, I thought that the story of what was happening in that part of the world was not getting enough coverage. Well, boy, it is now. A quick What the Farage moment. Sadiq Khan getting ready for his big Mansion House speech, at which he will call for increased levels of immigration. Yes, he will. And closer relationships with the European Union. Delving into national and international politics, whilst since he became Mayor of London, 1,000 people have been murdered, many of them, of course, by people carrying knives. I would suggest the Mayor of London has a wrong set of priorities. Now, are Labour going to bring us the nanny state? And we learned overnight that Keir Starmer is going to tell us, maybe even personally, as young kids, how we should brush our teeth. Here was Keir Starmer being interviewed by the BBC on the concept of the nanny state.
I'm absolutely up for that fight, that challenge. I'm here at Old Hay, a children's hospital, and it's very obvious to me, they've said it to me, they've got problems with too many obese children, and they have to treat them. It's very bad for the child, it's very expensive for the health service. The idea that the state just says, well, that's none of our business, I just think is fundamentally wrong. I'd make the same argument in relation to supervised toothbrushing. I was genuinely shocked to learn that the most common cause of admission for 6 to 10-year-olds is decaying teeth which have to be extracted. That is shocking. So don't tell me that it's nanny state to say we're going to do something to prevent that. That is obviously right for the child. It's obviously right for the NHS.
Supervised toothbrushing. Goodness gracious me. Well, we sent our reporter Adam Cherry out onto the streets of London to see what people thought about that.
I think you've got to be very careful what Keir Starmer says and what he does. It's two different things.
He said he's going to introduce supervised toothbrushing in schools. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it's going to take a lot of doing that.
Like, it's clearly a good idea, but really, is that the thing that we need to be focusing on right now?
What a foolish man Keir Starmer is. What a foolish man. The things which are happening in schools today is absolutely disgusting. They're teaching the kids absolute evil.
I think teaching children to brush teeth is a reasonable thing to learn.
I mean, it's not a major life imposition to be taught how to brush your teeth, I don't think.
No.
This is why a lot of pupils are going out of school today, is the parents are not really on top of their children.
And are we also heading towards a nanny state?
Nanny state. Do you know what we're headed to, young man?
Tell me, please.
We're headed to Armageddon.
Well, there you are. Go out and ask the public. You never know what you're going to get. All I would say is, of course, young kids aged 5 and 6 should be taught things like personal hygiene at primary school. Of course they should. But we don't want it from the government. Go away. Leave us alone. We'll make our own decisions and our own mistakes in our lives. Now, I'm flying off to Iowa on Saturday morning. I want to be there for the first big Republican, well, I'm going to use the word now, caucus. Yes, there's caucusing going on in Iowa. This is a primary election for who is going to be the candidate for the Republican Party. Well, what is a caucus? How does it all work? Well, I'm very pleased to say I'm joined down the line right now by Tommy Pigott, Director of Strategic Communications for the Republican National Committee. Tommy, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I'm heading off for the 20 degrees below weather of Iowa. But before I get there and start to try and explain to a British audience the excitement of the day, just tell us, what is a caucus?
Well, a caucus or caucuses are where voters go to a location or a precinct and they hear from representatives of the different campaigns. Usually it's a short speech. And then they vote for who they want to be the nominee. So instead of going to a location where you would vote maybe throughout the day, voters arrive at 7 p.m. Iowa time, and they hear from those candidates, and then they make their decision. So it's really about that civic engagement that Iowa is so known for. In America, Iowa is known for voters being incredibly involved and wanting to hear directly from their candidates spending all these months in Iowa. And this is when that all pays off, when voters actually make that decision.
And if I was a candidate, you know, would I be going from meeting to meeting to meeting all throughout the day?
Well, these meetings all happen at the same time in terms of you're probably going out and campaigning and seeing voters in different towns, but the Iowa caucuses happen at the same time across the board, and voters are expected to arrive on time at those caucuses. So generally you have representatives that show up from the campaigns to these different precincts, and it's all about that ground game of making sure campaigns have that representative at that precinct, but also that you bring up people that are intending to vote for your candidate. So you might not go to several of these meetings, but candidates are most likely going to be going from town to town to town, making sure they get their representatives to those precincts or making sure they get their voters out to those caucuses.
I have to say, I mean, I'm actually quite excited about being in Iowa over the course of the next few days. It's a much more open system, I think, than we have for selecting party leaders, prime ministerial candidates in our country. There has been, thus far, between the candidates, some pretty heated debate, let's put it like that, and it was certainly going on yesterday between Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis. Do these caucuses, do they stay calm? Is there a sense of order, or can it get a bit out of hand?
Well, I'd say they get more out of hand from the Democrat side because Democrats don't know how to run a caucus. That's why the Democratic Party's actually changed how they're running these because they're incompetent in terms of how they run them. The Republican side is much more competent. We actually are able to run these caucuses. And I would say enthusiasm's the word. Republicans aren't afraid of debate because we know debate makes our ideas stronger, and we know our ideas win. It's a Democratic Party that's changing their primary process, that's running from Iowa in droves. So, you know, there's going to be these debates. There's going to be this, back and forth in primaries. We're all going to come together and beat Joe Biden in November. But again, we're not afraid of debate. And I would say the word is enthusiasm, and that starts now officially with Iowa.
Tommy Pigott, I'm looking forward to seeing the enthusiasm. I suspect it might just bubble over between one or two of the candidates. And thank you for giving us a brief and for joining us. And we will, for that matter, over the course of the next few months, fill you in absolutely on how the Democrats are organising things as well. In a moment, it's time for Talking Pints. It's time for a real uplifting story of a man who suffered an horrendous injury, yet has overcome it all and gone on to win a Paralympic gold medal. Yep, Danny Crates joins me in just a moment for Talking Pints.
On Patrick Christie's tonight, 9 to 11 with me, Mark Dolan. As Keir Starmer announces its plans to send the nanny state into overdrive, do we need Labour to brush our teeth and wipe our bums? I'll ask Daily Telegraph columnist Alison Pearson if those culpable in the post office scandal should face jail. Plus, Anne Widdecombe exposes the next big miscarriage of justice that no one is talking about. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight with me, Mark Dolan, 9 to 11 on GB News.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests, and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's my favourite part of the week. Yes, it's time for Talking Pints, and I'm joined by Essex boy Danny Crates, Paralympic gold medalist, among many things. Danny, welcome to the programme. Now, I said Essex boy, which indeed you are, and you've always been a lover of sport.
Ever since I was a kid, I think like most people that end up doing sport or professional sport, you first find sport because you don't sit still very long, and you get sent out on the school field quite regularly to go and burn off a bit of energy. And I've not necessarily followed sport, watched sport, but I've always taken part. Football, cricket, rugby, athletics, you name it, I've done it.
So there you are, fit young man. You're in Australia.
Yeah.
On a gap year, very sensible thing to do. I get it. I've just come back from Australia, of course. I think a few people saw me in the jungle. But no, I mean, great place to travel around, wonderful. You're there having an adventure, and then disaster happens.
Yeah, I mean, luckily I was at the end of my year, so I'd done my gap year.
Good.
Or as I always say, it's as many a year's worth of pints between Sydney and Cairns, the Essex version of a gap year. But I literally was right at the end, and I was doing the very last job before I was coming home, and I was involved in a car crash. I was literally going to the last point to say goodbye to my friends, and then I was going to fly home.
And you had this horrendous car crash. You lose an arm. How do you feel mentally after that?
I think, like many people that have been, like you've been in the scrapes yourself, right? And anyone who's been in those environments, and hospital's the safe space. So you're safe when you're in there, and you're not really got to think about it too much. It's when you come out. And obviously, I had a short. My family had to fly. This is pre-mobile phone, emails. So mum and dad got the phone call at 4 o'clock in the morning. Horrendous. And then dad had to go to London to get the visas, the tickets. So then they was on a plane. They was at my bedside within 36 hours, but they didn't know what condition I was in. They just got told it was a very serious accident. Yeah. And so I had them there, and then eventually came out of hospital and had about 2-3 weeks still in Australia before I was strong enough to fly home. And it's when I got home, because obviously I got home, mum and dad had to go back to work, and that's when it hit home the hardest, I think. And I was a rugby player previously, and it was just those things started to make me realise not necessarily what I'd lost, but what I might not be able to do as I'd done it before.
But you keep playing sport. You decide it's not going to stop you. I mean, you clearly come out of this still with a positive mental attitude. You clearly decide what's happened is rotten, but I'm going to keep going.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been, I'm not always positive. We aren't, right? Sure. So we have the highs, we have the lows. But for me, it was always about trying to make something of it and try not to let it defeat me. So rugby was the first thing. I went back to I'm a Thurrock boy, so I went back to my local rugby club. And then it was there. That was, I've got my friends and family at home, and that was my family as well. And they nurtured me, and I was training again. And 6 months after starting training, so it was only a year after the accident, we decided I was going to play again.
Which is amazing. But then you start to get bullied by the Paralympics.
Yeah.
Association, and a man called Peter Arnott keeps ringing you, and in the end you give in and decide you're going to become a Paralympian. How competitive are the Paralympics?
Well, see, when he first contacted me, because some of the news stories around me playing rugby, and it was just on a dreary November day, so it made quite big news. All the tabloids had done it, and the mainstream news channels had done it. They videoed it, featured it, and obviously, in amongst that, I used to be a track and field athlete, right? So that had been mentioned, and there was this guy called Peter Arnott who looked after the amputee section, and you can't just become a Paralympian. It is very, very high level sport. But he said, like, we've just not long come back from the Atlanta Games, and would you like to come and start training with the squad and see how it feels? I'm just like, look, I play rugby. Right? We hang upside down and drink Guinness for our eyeballs. Do you do that at athletics? No, right, I'm staying with rugby. And he just contacted me again out of the blue one day, and I was actually around a rugby player's friend's house, and my friend's wife answered my phone. And I was like, don't answer it, it's Peter Arnott, right? And she answered the phone, and I just said, all right, I'll come and meet some of the athletes. Because I'd always perceived disability sport was kind of give it a go. I'd never really seen it as what it was, and it was sport to the highest level. I met these athletes, and they'd come back from Atlanta, and some had just missed out on medals or getting in finals, and I saw what it meant to them. And I suddenly realised it was sport.
It was real.
And that just ignited there and then, just started a journey that I never imagined.
Danny, what a journey. Bronze in your first Paralympics, and the big one.
Yeah.
In your second, let's have a look at this. Yeah, I've got to have a look at this.
So this is the Athens medal. This is
the gold medal, Paralympic gold medal, 800 metres.
800, yeah. I made the switch after Sydney. I just couldn't quite get the 4 right, and it just wasn't fitting. So it was all that change for me.
How proud are you of that?
Massively. I mean, it was more that what went into it, and actually what makes me more proud is not just winning the medal, but I had like 30 of my friends and family in the stadium, and that... they call it sacrifices in sport, or when you go in for something in life. And it's not. It's life choices for me. I made a choice, and my friends backed me all the way. And I missed their holidays, births of their kids, their parties.
You've got to be dedicated. Yeah,
and I wasn't here sometimes. I was away training in South Africa, in America, Australia. We used to train. But when it came to the big one, they was there, and that's what meant so much to me. That they'd been on that journey with me, and they never questioned it.
There are no shortcuts, though, are there? All the people that I know that have succeeded at sport have worked blooming hard.
There's no shortcuts in anything, right? If you want to be successful and there is a success at the end of it, then it's never going to be easy, right? It's always a journey. It's always going to have its highs and its lows. And I had mine. I had the injuries, the setbacks, the doubts.
But, you've gone on, media career, celebrity master chef, your book, Danny Boy, and now a business which goes around and talks to people about their mindset.
Yes, alongside being an athlete, I was a speaker as well. I always felt it's important to have something else to take my mind off sport sometimes. And then, so I started the keynote speaking circuit. I've done that for 24 years, and that just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And it got to a stage where my coach was, that's great, Dan, you can go and speak in Malaysia, but there's your training programme. As long as you do that, you can go and speak wherever you want. So that carried on after I retired, and then I've sort of expanded it now to working with businesses and helping the teams within them understand what that high-performance mindset looks like and how some of the lessons we learnt from sport, but they're not all great from sport, so some of the lessons we learn from business as well and people that are doing it well.
Well, I have to say, Danny, you're a very inspirational figure. We all get some knocks in life, but you had a really big, difficult, nasty one. You've overcome it. Been a huge success. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
To have you on the programme. It really has. Thank you. Now, we heard a few moments ago from that news flash, and we'd already been briefed that there was going to be a cabinet meeting starting at 7:45. I've been in the studio. Jacob Rees-Mogg has been outside the studio. He will know perhaps more than me what is going on.
Well, calling an emergency cabinet meeting is always a sign that something is going to happen. They're not called just for chit-chat, and therefore I would assume that there is a plan in place, and the UK really has to respond to this escalating problem in the Red Sea.
Yeah, we can't just have missiles drone missiles being sent towards naval vessels, can we?
We talked about this a night or two ago, that the Royal Navy has had an historic role of keeping the sea lanes open, of keeping the trade routes open. It is fundamental and acting in concert with the US. And interestingly, a UN a motion passed at the Security Council. China abstained, but nonetheless didn't veto. So it has UN backing to tell the Houthis to stop doing this.
Yeah. And, Jacob, we hear that Lindsay Hoyle perhaps going to be recalling Parliament tomorrow.
Well, Parliament has tended to be recalled, though this is an interesting constitutional point. The job of Parliament is to scrutinise the government, not to replace the decision-making of the government. And I'm not sure it's been wise in the past to get Parliament to give carte blanche for military action. I think the government should take it under the normal executive prerogative powers and then report back to Parliament, which is what we always used to do.
So in that situation, then the Cabinet tonight would debate this, a decision would be made, and then Parliament can ask how that decision was made.
And is it the right decision? That's what happened with the Falklands. The task force went off, and Parliament was assembled, but to be told what was happening.
On a Saturday.
On a Saturday.
My 18th birthday. 3rd of April.
Was it really?
3rd of April, 1982. There you are, Jacob. Thank you very much. It was, so I can't forget it, really, can I? Yeah, gosh, a long time ago. Now, I am heading off to Iowa. It is 20 below centigrade. It's windy. It sounds absolutely awful, but I think the politics of seeing how the Republican Party do a primary to pick their presidential candidate is going to be really exciting. I'll be live from Iowa on Monday. Please join me then. In between, please have a great end of the week, and let's have a look and let's see what the weather has got in store for us.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update with me, Annie Shuttleworth, from the Met Office. Tomorrow will be a cloudy day for many of us. However, where it has been gloomy in recent days across much of Scotland, we'll see a chance of more sunshine. High pressures in charge across the UK, and as a result, it's staying dry for the bulk of the country through the rest of the week. We've got quite a lot of cloud, though, coming in off the east coast through this evening, spreading across much of Wales, into northern England, southern Scotland, even parts of eastern Northern Ireland seeing some of that low cloud, so it will be milder where the cloud cover persists. However, where we do see the clear spells across Scotland and Northern Ireland, is going to be a cold and frosty start tomorrow. We could be down as low as -8. However, as I said, there will be more sunshine in these areas lasting through much of the day. Further south, though, the cloud will linger for many areas. We could see some sunny spells coming through across parts of Wales and parts of the southwest by the afternoon, but in general, it'll be a little bit of a cloudier day. Temperatures around 6 or 7 degrees in the south. That's just below average for the time of year. Across the north, we'll start to see some drizzly rain sinking southwards. That will sink further southwards throughout Saturday, perhaps bringing some hill snow. But it's behind that we see the cold weather arriving to the north of Scotland for Saturday afternoon. And it's in the evening when we start to see a risk of some snow showers falling across Scotland. But for many of us, through Sunday, it should stay dry, bright and a little bit chilly. See you later.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me.